All right, there's a few things. First off, thank you for having me. I think I'm one of two gentlemen here, and gang, gang, and it's quite the honor. A few things too. I am going to use my phone because they offered me cue cards, but I want to be a little bit more environmentally friendly. But before I start, just a quick background about me. I'm a founder of something, but this is more about Elizabeth Plank. But so I will be brief. But I'm the founder of the Ocho system, which is an integrative kind of health and wellness strategy that looks to utilize productivity through physical enhancement. I'm also a columnist for GQ. I'm a Nike master trainer. I'm the creative director of wellness for Smartwater. And I run a nonprofit called System of Service. So basically, I look to kind of incorporate wellness in multiple capacities and often take a gender agnostic approach to my training, which has gotten me some notoriety. So with that being said, I am also a friend of Liz Plank's. Funny story about how we met. I won't share it. But now we met. Come on now. We met probably 6 or so years ago because I followed her on Twitter, and I thought what she was putting out was great. And I thought she was giving a fresh new perspective on kind of what it meant to be a person, let alone a man in society. So I saw her at Soho House, and I was like, oh my God, you're Liz Plank. And she looked at me like I saw a ghost. And then, but from that moment on, we became really good friends. But that being said, she's award-winning, master's in policy from London School of Economics. She did something that was super great, was for the Olympics that I saw in 2012. She was successful in reversing the decision after petitioning out over 50,000 signatures where female boxers had to wear skirts. So she got that flipped. That was great. Round of applause for that. Named Forbes 30 Under 30 in media with a host of other awards, is the author of the new book, For the Love of Men. But most importantly, what I liked the most was that in undergrad, she was on the synchronized swimming team. So she has a plethora of accomplishments. Let's give her a huge round of applause, please. Let her welcome out. Yes, yes, yes. I love it. Take a seat.
Let's do it. I didn't know that you knew I was a synchronized swimmer.
You know, I got shooters out there that are out getting data on you, you know?
Yes, you did your research.
You gotta know.
And I was so surprised when you came up to me because you're just not my demo, as you can tell from this room. There are not a lot of men who followed me at the time. There are more men who follow me now, and I'm very thankful for that because I think they're very important in this conversation, all conversations. But I am so glad that you did come up to me. And I got into trouble because I took a photo because I was a loser who'd never been to Soho House and didn't know about their policy. So we got into trouble. But turned out good.
All right. Well, here we are. We're going to talk about masculinity, which, as a cis male, I'm getting better at this. And please forgive my ignorance because this is what I think is something that's very important, especially as men are trying to get better, is that we need safe spaces to be able to talk about these things. So forgive me if I'm a little bit bashful, and forgive me if I make ignorant comments. I will try my best not to. But this is why I'm here. But before we even get to the book, what I think is very important is to talk about how we got to the book. Mm-hmm. So I'm very intrigued by your TEDx talk. Like, how did you get to that point? How did you feel about the feedback from it? For those of you who don't know, the book, For the Love of Men, Liz could correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah, let's put the water there, yeah. It was, the TED Talk was kind of inspiration for the full maturation of the book. So, Liz, talk more about it.
Yeah, so I was asked to do a TEDx talk 2 weeks before the 2016 election, so I was in a really good headspace. I was covering the election for Vox at the time, and so I went to Illinois to present this TED Talk about how men needed to be in this conversation. The tone was very different from what the book turned out to be. So the name of the TED Talk was actually, of the TEDx Talk was called How to Be a Man, a Woman's Guide. And it was, I was very annoyed, and I was very, like, what are you guys doing? And get it together. dudes.
Yeah, I mean,
Which I still think
sorry.
you should. But then the comments are a whole other fun game. You can go and read them. They're very entertaining. A lot of pissed off men and women, but also that it's YouTube. It's like a cesspool. If you're a woman, it really is. Like even my videos on Vox, a channel from a media company, you'd think there'd be some level of class, but no. So anyway, TEDx talk went really well, but then Trump got elected, and then things felt very different, and the stakes felt very different, and I started being really interested in actually listening, not just talking to men and telling them how to be and how to act, because I think that was just not going to work. And it's really hard to start a conversation by saying, this is what you're doing wrong. And I think this applies to politics. This applies to everything, right? So many of us have friends or family members who are politically different from us, and I get asked this all the time, like, how do I talk to my Republican, I'm guessing this is like mostly progressive space, but usually this is a question I get as a progressive, how do I talk to my Republican aunt, or how do I, and the answer is, like, ask her questions and actually listen to the answer, because so often, I think even progressives, we come in like self-righteous, and we don't really want to know how to give them information. We want to know how to prove them that we're right. And again, when has that worked in a conversation in your life? Probably not. And so, yeah, I started listening, and then I started realizing that, yes, men were hurting us, and yes, I had been on the other end of that pain, and that's why I'm a feminist, and that's why I've dedicated my life to studying this and researching it and doing videos about it. And but at the same time, the pain that men were causing, it's because they were in pain, and they had been hurt by the same system, which is the patriarchy. And it is a system of oppression. It is a system that tells us that we need to be a certain way based on imaginary made-up rules. And it's really made up. It's hilarious to me now that I've done the research, which I lay out a lot in the book, just how this sort of gender binary doesn't really even exist in science and in the animal kingdom. We have given it a lot of importance, and it's not to say that there's no difference between men and women, but there are many differences between the both of us. You have ears that are slightly smaller than mine. They're very fine and beautiful. Mine have like lobes that just lobe down.
I was premature.
You were?
Yeah, that's why
You're
I'm so
tall. That's surprising.
Sorry.
Don't apologize. There you go. But we don't organize bathrooms based on earlobes. We don't decide who pays for the check based on who has like a smaller nose. We don't give importance to some of those physical features, but we give a lot of importance to gender, and we give a lot of importance to race. As we know, we are 99.9% genetically the same, but we give a certain importance to certain differences, and then we give meaning to them, and then we create behaviors that then prove our imaginary rules right. And then we're like, see, men are stupider. Like, see, men are more violent. And then when you actually go through that, like, are they more violent? Are they biologically predisposed to be dumbasses? No, they're not. And I did the research so that you don't have to. And I talk to men so that you don't have to. This is not about, I'm going on a monologue. I know that I'm just not answering your question at all. But I also just want to put it out there that I don't think that this is a women's responsibility. I don't think that it's the emotional labor of women to fix men. And that's why I wrote this book. Like, I did it so that you don't have to. So I just want to put that out there for the person who's like sitting there being like, I'm going to ask her why this is up to us. It's not. It is not up to you. It is up to them, but we have to give them the tools and the support system so that they can do it, so that we don't have to. And so that's why I wrote the book.
I like that.
Gave you all the things.
No, it's real. A lot of those things hit me, including, as I was reading the book, just the concept of the patriarchy and how it's a systemic structure, and how it seeks to dismantle a lot of different things. But with the evolution of, I guess, the definition of feminism, as you were talking to, you were at first, I guess, a little bit more cancel men, as you so candidly said.
Probably tweeted that, at one point,
Probably.
if you go back in my tweets.
How did that evolve to not just include men in the conversation, but make that more intersectional, whether that be with gender, whether that be with race? Like, how has your mindset evolved over the years?
I mean, it is so interesting because once you start talking about masculinity, once you start talking about gender to men, you realize that it's like Fight Club, right? The number one rule is that you don't really talk about it. And so that's why I wanted to talk about it more, because as a reporter, right, if someone doesn't really want to talk about something, you're like, I have 25 more questions to ask you about that. And so, and you can obviously tell me if I'm right or not, but based on a lot of the interviews that I would have with men and the conversations I would have with men, it was very clear that the experience of being a man in our society, every man had a different experience in the same way that we should not and would never expect every woman in this room to have the same experience of their gender. It is raised, it is determined by your class, determined by your sexual orientation, your level of ability, and all of those things. So the most interesting conversations I had about masculinity were with the men who didn't fit neatly into it, right? So it was talking to Thomas Page McBee, which is the first, I have these amuse-bouches in the book as palate cleansers for all the data, which are just stories about men that I found really interesting, and when I would call them up or meet up with them to interview them, instead of it being like a half-hour call, it would turn into like a 4-hour, follow, and then I would call them and ask them more questions. So those men I kind of just built out more as little stories within the book. And so the first story is Thomas Page McBee, who is an amazing author. You should go buy his book, Amateur, and he is the first trans person to box at Madison Square Gardens, and so he is amazing, and he learned so much about masculinity when he became a man, right? He talks about how all of a sudden he would be in meetings, and everyone, when he talked, this is amazing, people would listen. People would stop talking. And so that was new before that because he was treated as a woman in those spaces, and we are often interrupted, not just by men, but by women more. And so that was one example. DRC is a really good friend of mine who is Black and gay and has a disability, and he talked about all of the ways that this ideal of masculinity, this like male privilege, obviously that he has, but is actually, he doesn't get that much out of it, right? And no, to become like the patriarchy is a pyramid scheme, right? So it's a power structure, just like all the other power structures. We talk a lot about the power structure where men are at the top and women are at the bottom, but there's also a power structure of men. And there are men who are at the top and there are men who are at the bottom. And the men who are at the top look a certain way. You can imagine, right? They're cisgender, they're straight, they're able-bodied, and they're rich, and they're Donald Trump, okay? And then they become president, and then Billy Bush loses his job because he laughed at Donald Trump's joke and couldn't call him out, and maybe he wanted to, but he didn't know how, and he did the wrong thing, obviously. But he lost his job. Donald Trump became president. Sean Spicer lied on behalf of the president, just was like, did whatever he wanted so that he could access that, in that power structure, be as close to the guy at the top. Ended up on Dancing with the Stars, okay? Totally humiliation of, he was a respected, maybe this was his grand plan the whole time, but he was a respected member of the Republican Party and went from, just a total laughing stock. We can talk about Michael Cohen, who's now maybe watching us from jail, where he is right now paying time for lying on behalf of the president. Again, and this is like one example. Rudy Giuliani probably will be, meeting up with him in that jail. And so the patriarchy doesn't work for most men. The patriarchy actually is a system that is again a power structure, and we can go off all day and talk about how the patriarchy is bad for women, and we should talk about it all the time. I don't understand why we don't talk about why the patriarchy is bad for men. Like purely as a marketing strategy for feminism and for more equality, I don't understand why we would hide some of the benefits of a product or of a strategy and be like, let's not talk about that part. People might like it and want to be part of our party. And so I'm very interested in laying those things out and making this movement really inclusive and like a block party, not a speakeasy, somewhere where everyone can come and everyone's welcome, and you might say the wrong word and like we're not going to cancel you. We're not canceling Joe, okay? We're not doing that today, no matter what he says.
Please don't. But no, that's what I loved about the book, because first off, you gave very specific kind of examples that broke it up. So as Liz was explaining, there is a bounty of quality information in the book that sometimes gets a little overwhelming, just because I also like to fact check. But that's fine, because I take breaks.
I got a fact checker. It's all
That's
fact,
fine.
it's all true.
I got to be
It's all
true to my values.
You've been Googling things?
Yes.
Oh my God, you're such a weirdo.
And then there's breaks in the book that give very specific examples, so it's a good mix
There's
of.
a bibliography at the end. That's how book works, by the way.
Wow, I don't know
you
how
can
book
just
works.
Go there. Yeah, no. But just
I'm
so
Ivy
you
League
don't have to-
educated, Elizabeth.
Okay, I'm sorry. You don't have. I'm trying to save you time, but I love that you're Googling things. I think you should keep doing that.
But the main point was me giving you credit, because what I often think is we miss aspects of inclusion rather versus exclusion. So even when it comes to, say, if I train a woman versus a man, I take a gender agnostic approach to it. If I talk about
What does
eating
that mean
strategy,
for you? What does that mean?
So what it means for me is that, and this is a point that Liz makes in the book, is essentially, I keep calling you Elizabeth, and Liz makes in the book, is that women through feminism, correct me if I'm wrong, have been able to have access to quote-unquote ideals that are typically masculine and that may benefit them. Say, in a sense, could wear leather pants or pantsuit or something. The same thing is basically often what you see in fitness, is the fact that sometimes if you train more men and more women, stereotypically like men, they meet the results faster. You get them strong, you make them comfortable in the weight room, you get them used to fulfilling their athletic potential. Now, I've noticed the same thing with the point that you're making in the book, that men often don't have access, due to the way the patriarchy works, to quote-unquote aspects that would make them more feminine. So in the same way, when a man is training as well, if men were to say sometimes do a little bit more yoga, which I partake in sometimes, do a little bit more Pilates, which I do too, do a little bit more low-intensity, steady-state work.
We did yoga one time. I can confirm.
I fell asleep.
Fact check. Yes, he did.
But I was tired. Sometimes they meet their goals faster. So then the thing becomes is, how do we dismantle that? What should men do? What should we think? What do you see as your form of kind of inclusive?
I think this is so fascinating. I was having this conversation with a man called Ryan Abeck, who does this amazing workout called Body Art, which we should go to. You will dig it. It's like a boot camp meets yoga. It's incredible. And it's based and rooted in Chinese medicine and philosophy of the yin and the yang. So there's a lot of actually melding female and male energy, and that one is not better than the other, and all of that. Super interesting. And he was saying he was a dancer. He was a backup dancer for Beyonce, no big deal. And he fulfilled his athletic potential by performing with Beyonce. There is nothing more amazing than that. But of course, his father, not of course, but like many men, grew up with within a system and a society and a culture that tells him that men do not dance, and that there's something wrong with you if you enjoy dancing. And so he had to have this sort of combative relationship with his father based on this. And his father would say, but there's something really interesting about that, right? So his father wanted him to be athletic, right? So the athletic part is also kind of a pressure for a lot of men and a lot of boys. You are clearly, you are an athletic man, and that is great, and you are doing that. There are many men who do not have that as a natural inclination and do not want to partake in that, and they are better at singing or doing lab experiments. I don't know. They have other things that they like to do, but a lot of boys and men will tell me that as boys they felt very a big pressure to be athletic. So his father would be like, "You can't do this, you can't," and I'm gonna get up, okay? So get up. Okay. So you can't do you can't do this, you can't move your hips, but you can do this, you could play baseball. And he was like, it's just movement. Why is one movement? Why is me using my hips, right, to throw up a baseball? Am I doing it right? Kind of. I'm not, but I I could. I'm amazing. I could see, like, it's just, and so why is that movement different from that movement? Isn't that kind of wild? And so that's it. That's what I wanted you to do. You can sit down. But right, but it just, again, it's about like getting outside of our preconceived notions of, well, dancing is for women and baseball is for guys, and really examining like why are these rules the way that they are, and do we want to do we think that builds a society where everyone can meet their potential? And I love that word because it is potential, whether it's athletic or spiritual or professional, right? That we spend a lot of time talking about how, and not enough time, I'm not saying, like, again, that we should not talk about women and girls, but we do spend some time talking about women and girls not being in certain fields and not meeting their potential in terms of engineering and coding, right? These institutions or these professions that are heavily male-dominated. We don't spend as much time thinking about the professions where men are missing, like social work, like care work, like nursing, like teaching, right? In the book, I talk about a lot of data that is 2% of teachers are black men, 2%, and then you look at the data showing that having one black teacher. If you are a black boy living in a marginalized neighborhood, if you have one black teacher, it makes you 38% more likely to go to college. One black teacher in the second grade, Mrs. Dumfrey.
I had the best black teacher in the 6th grade.
Well, you remember who it is. Who is it for you?
Mrs. Grant.
There you go.
She gave me a C on my first assignment. From that point on, I said I would never get another damn C.
There you go.
And I went Ivy League, baby.
There you go. It's true. Yes. See? And so look at what that did for you and think about what it could do for so many other boys and girls, obviously, but we know that there's a serious education gap in this country and in many other countries where boys are just not performing. Boys are just not interested. There's a real, and the really interesting thing with that data too, other data, it's not the same one, but basically, there's an education gap, okay? So boys tend to do and fare less well than girls in school, so they just don't have the same kind of marks overall, and they tend to drop out more. In high resource environments, so in like rich schools basically, which in this country means white schools, that education gap is inexistent, right? So what that tells us is that boys actually may need more support in certain instances when they are in a setting of poverty, when they are marginalized, or when they are, basically growing up with a lack of resources because of the way that our government works and our society works. And so, again, when you say that to certain people, they'll say, boys don't need more support. That's coddling, right? Boys need less. And if you listen to Jordan Peterson and Tucker Carlson and all of those guys, which I did a lot of for the book, and so that you don't have to, you can just like quote them, like as if you've listened to every YouTube, piece of trash that's out there that they've done. But they will, it is trash, but they will say, boys need to toughen up. We need to give them less of that. And we're feminizing them. We're all that crap. And that's misogyny. It's like all rooted in sexism and patriarchy. But we have to challenge those ideas because our society is at stake, right? Like the biggest problems in our society, unfortunately, like shocker, are like there's a lot of men who are causing those problems. Mass shootings, right? The rise of the alt-right. There are it's no surprise that there are so many men out there who are doing bad things when we have a system that raises them to be isolated, vulnerable, and then not admit that they're vulnerable.
These are all facts. But back to the book for a second, because there are a few things. So what you make a point is very interesting. One, success is indeed by structure. And often the times that we glorify men the most, in the arenas we glorify men the most, they have the most support structures. Take sports. LeBron is great because of the support structure around him. So then the thing becomes, so there's a few things. One, I want to challenge you on a couple things. Two, I'm going to tell you what I loved about the chapters I loved. I loved the chapter on shame because one of the greatest things that I had to learn very early on, especially through sports, was the act of forgiving myself, but also the act of coming to terms with failure, which I find very interesting because in the book, there's one point where the guy says one of the things he struggles with is because failure is demonized among men. But within the sports system, which we make where men are considered the alpha, failure is glorified. So I'm often very confused about where are they learning some of these things.
What do you mean failure is glorified in sports?
Some of the best quotes about sports, whether it's a Michael Jordan quote, whether it's a Muhammad Ali quote,
Right.
are about failure. Because to an extent, you can't have long-term success unless you deal with failure. Michael Jordan had 3 first-round exits or something like that. You know, at the end of the day, Rocky still lost his fight. A little bit of me thinks that when we talk about the coddling of the male generation, if we were to actually teach them these lessons through a little bit of hard-earned and hard-worked sport, a lot of these stereotypes would disappear. So some of the things that I struggle with are the fact that we're trying to move men away from these traditional quote-unquote structures, but at the end of the day, if we just updated these traditional structures, these lessons that, you know, we want men to learn would be. So is there a way to bridge the gap between quote-unquote traditional masculinity and modern masculinity?
Yeah, I mean, a few things. I think that Michael Jordan is allowed to talk about failure because he's Michael Jordan, right? Tony Robbins can talk about failure because he's Tony Robbins. So these are prototypical, ideal. They fit into prototypical ideals of masculinity, or certain of them, and they are successful, right? And so I think that, yes, failure is, to your point, because I read a lot of those quotes. I read a lot about sports to be able to get into the male psyche, which is a stereotype, blah, 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 I know. But it actually taught me a lot about how much of these, sports is just, anyway, politics is just sports. Like, it's just, like, actually all of the, it's kind of, it makes it a hard space to be a woman, to be completely honest. I think we should have more.
Politics is sports.
No, they're not, though. That's anyway. That's a whole other thing. I think that if more women were in politics, it would look very differently, and we would treat it differently. And that's not because I'm essentializing women, but I think the women are brought up differently, and we're given different toys, we're given different values. Our emotional intelligence is, encouraged. So anyway, but that's a separate thing. So yeah, I think that men in sports, especially, also get to live outside of the bounds of masculinity because they're doing sports. Like, one of the things that I think is super fascinating is that men can't hold hands in public. Men who are friends, right? I mean, some men do it, but it's like, I'm sure if one of your male friends were just like holding your hands, you'd be like, okay, this is like fun, but like this is, people would look at you and assume that you are gay, or assume that you are a gay couple if you're doing that, because it is so rare to see men show affection to each other in that way. So men are not supposed to hold hands in public, but if men are wearing a football uniform, they can touch each other's butts. Like, that doesn't make sense to me. That doesn't make sense. Please explain that.
So I would say it's different microcultural norms that are able to show affinity. So take, for example, if I'm walking down the block with a woman that's a friend or a romantic interest, it's frowned upon if I put my arm on her like this to show affection, that's on her shoulder, which I would do with a man. Yeah, because like, this is uncomfortable. What are you doing? This is weird. Versus either holding hands or interlocking. But if I'm with a guy, I'll put my arm around him,
right?
And it'll typically be okay.
Right.
But holding hands, maybe they're just different signs of affection. So,
Sure.
But my question becomes, can we create a structure in which we still have, where we have the underlying value that is present that can be healthy, but we remove a little bit from trying to utilize the same tactics between the sexes or gender, etc., to show it?
Yeah, so yes. And also, I am not interested in telling men how to be men. Like, this is like, I'm going to answer your question because you asked me, but I think that you guys should figure that out. That's your shit. Like, that's not I'm not a man. I didn't grow up as a man in our society. I wouldn't ask a guy how to be a woman. Like, and I'm not what I think is, not going to be as useful and fruitful as you guys doing that and having those conversations, and women can be around if you want us to, or we can just go to the, we'll sip, Mai Tais and like go do our own thing while you guys figure that out. But I think that so when I talk to men about what being a man means, and I would ask those are really interesting questions. I would highly encourage you, if you're going out and having these conversations with men, they're good conversation starters, and again, they're the beginning of a conversation instead of the end of a conversation. I would just ask, like, what does being a man mean to you? Like, when did you know that you were a man? What does it mean to be a man? And responses were very varied and different, but one thing came up all the time, which was being a provider, right? Providing, and we see it in the data. It's not just in the conversations that I had. It really showed up in the research. And there's actually, protection, right? So being the protector, being the provider. And I actually think, and you might disagree, and that's fine, I actually think those are really great values. I think those are virtues, right? It's virtuous for either of us to want to protect the people that we love. Don't we all? I mean, and to want to provide for the people that we love, right? Those are really core human connection, and we're hardwired to have those needs and to want to do that for the people around us, to preserve our tribe and preserve our family. So, but I think it's in the way that it's expressed that's wrong, or that's hurtful or damaging. I think that if we tell men that the only way that you can provide is if you're making money, and if there's no dollars coming in, that's the one way that you can be a man. If you don't have that, then you're not a man. And that's literally what our society is right now, by the way. It's super capitalistic. It's super individualistic. It's I think problematic for many reasons, and it's also problematic for women, because then so people who are providing are only the people who are making the money. What about the person who's at home making sure that people are fed? What about the person who's at home making sure that the chicken that's bought is cooked and is not served raw? And Martha, is it Martha Nussbaum? I'm like blanking. The academic, she talks about capabilities approach, right? So if I buy you a pencil and you don't know how to write, what's the point, right? That pencil cannot be used. And so women in many ways are providing in ways that are extremely important in our society. They're protectors. Women? Are you kidding me? Women are protectors. Women are protecting their families. And so we've made these roles like masculine. We've the way that we define them, I think is limiting for everyone. And then it makes people feel like they're falling short, and it makes people feel like they're a burden, which is like the suicide crisis. I mean, right?
Yeah, that hit me when I was looking at that, especially when it came to guns. But wanted to build upon that, because one of my favorite things from that chapter, Liz talks about how basically the patriarchy is killing men, which makes a lot of sense, especially as a black male. You typically have some of the lower life expectancies, which also becomes interesting because you made parallels with other cultures. So it oftentimes seems like a remnant of this, or the issue with this machismo culture, seems to be a remnant of the trauma of just colonialism and imperialism kind of in general. But that's a whole other deeper conversation. We're going to open it up to Q&A, so we won't get
End
there.
it on that.
But no, we're not going to end it. I want to do a rapid fire with you, which I think is very interesting.
Okay, great.
So in the chapter, Liz laid out basically norms that are traditionally associated with the current kind of vibe of masculinity, which typically lead to a lower life expectancy. There was 11 of them. And I did think they were particularly insidious, so I want to ask you what you would replace them with one by one.
Oh, God, I don't even remember them by heart.
I got them. Don't worry.
Off the top of your head?
I told you I got notes.
Oh, you got, I don't have notes.
Yes, but I'm going to give you the word, and then
okay.
you'll give me what you think is an updated counterexample of that for,
That was not well explained, but okay.
Your mindful masculinity. Yeah. All right, so basically we're going from toxic masculinity to mindful masculinity.
Yeah.
I'm going to lay out the 11 adjectives that Liz used to describe toxic masculinity.
Okay.
And I want to know what you would update them with.
Okay.
And then we'll do a Q&A.
Okay, sweet.
Did I mansplain myself well?
Yeah, you did. Yeah, I actually will probably not want to replace them with anything, but go.
Really?
Hit me. Yeah.
You won't want to update. Okay. Desire to win.
I don't think that is a problem. I think that the way that you win is the problem.
How should it manifest itself?
I think that we, again, have a very narrow view of we reward certain things. Everyone wants to win. Cool. I think we want winners. That's fine.
All right.
And it's okay to be competitive. It's okay to want to win. the way that you win and how you win is the problem. Is Donald? I mean, sorry, but Donald Trump, right? That's how you win. No, that's not how you win, and that's not winning. That's like you're lying, you're cheating, you're whatever.
All right, I feel that.
Yeah.
Need for emotional control.
I think that we have the wrong view of how emotional control works. So actually being vulnerable means that your emotions are not controlling you, and we think that not being vulnerable means that you're controlling your emotions. And it's again, we have a misunderstanding of how that works.
Yep. Made an interesting point in the book about stoicism too, which if you read the book, really take that into account. It's very interesting.
Yeah.
Risk taking.
I again don't have a problem with risk taking. We measure risk risk is subjective, right? The way that we measure risk is rooted in the way that we choose to measure it. And we tend to think that men take more risk than women, generally speaking. Fun fact, white men take more risk, and they're skewing your entire gender. So that's one thing. I know, it's hilarious.
Damn,
it's actually, it should be a white male effect, not a male effect. I know. They're not on stage to defend themselves, but and I know there's one out there. So anyway, white men are great. I love I came from I'm half white man, so I'm a big fan. But so white men take more risk, and then the other thing is that we measure risk, and I'm sorry, I'm really bad at rapid fire, but I'm saying it as fast as I can. So when you ask people about risk, and you ask them about a certain kind of risk where men, and particularly white men, have more to lose, which is uncharacteristic of our society, actually white men are more risk averse than people of color and than women. And the way that they measured it is basically by asking them, do you think that we should take a risk in taxing more of the rich and doing more income redistribution in more radical ways? Suddenly, white men are not so into risk. Same thing goes with climate change. And again, making radical changes to our culture and our society in order to reverse climate change. Green New Deal, anyone? Who's super against the Green New Deal? Who do you constantly see yelling at a 14-year-old girl who has Asperger's and has talked about it, and who is out there super threatened by that? White men, old white men who are rich, the rich ones. So they are suddenly very risk averse and very afraid of what that future can look like because they have more to lose. And so risk taking, not a problem. But we misunderstand it. We misunderstand it.
That's fair. Let's open up to Q&A because I love the sound of our voices, especially Liz's. But I want to hear if you guys have anything. Does anybody have any questions? We have one here. We have a mic coming around.
We only have 6 minutes.
We'll stay a little longer.
I'm sorry.
Hey, thanks for this. I think a lot of people here would share the view that something which is potentially a key unlock in this discussion is paternity leave, and even a concept of mandatory paternity leave, which feels like a big stretch given we don't even have paid or mandatory maternity leave. But it would be great to just hear your thoughts on that, because it feels like that's a key unlock in terms of men in some of the careers of care that you've talked about, men as just care role models within the home, which is a quick way of cascading behavior to their children, their sons, their daughters.
So when men get more paternity leave, more parental leave, they do more domestic chores without anyone asking them. It just happens. And that's because we are setting, a certain kind of message, or we are sending a certain kind of message. We're instructing a certain kind of value system in families, and so I think that change can be hard. And some people who don't want to change, you should not keep in your life, and that's not what I'm saying. But I also think that certain change can be easier than we think it is, and we can nudge people by making policy changes to make them engage in behavior that actually is, to your point, better for their lives. They have more time to spend with their children. Who doesn't love that? And for their children and for their families. And obviously, if they have female partners, for their female partners. Because, men still do far less domestic tasks than women do throughout the world. But where they have more paternity leave, there's a direct correlation that happens there. And so, most paternity leave in the country, in this country, in America, is not taken. Isn't that wild? That's wild. It's not taken. So it's a cultural issue, right? It's like even if you, and it goes back to, I mean, this whole paid and just parental leave in general is not available, and we have so much work to do here. But yeah, it's not just a policy question; it's a cultural question. And a lot of men feel like they can't. I mean, I've told me, and I've interviewed them, and lay out a case in the book about a man who fought Chase basically to have equal parental leave because Chase was giving out, not giving out, had a policy leave for women and mothers that was different from fathers. And this guy had a newborn baby who was premature, a wife that was sick, and he was like, wait, why do if I was a woman, I'd get more time, what the fuck? And so he fought and he won. And but like why do you have to spend 2 years of his life doing that? Why don't we have parental leave policies that are gender neutral? And do you know, fun fact, Donald Trump in 2016, because my favorite guy, in 2016 presented a parental leave policy brought to us by Ivanka Trump, and people might remember this. I just think it's wild. This was 2016, like not 1965. He omitted fathers. Like, it just was for moms. It was not for, obviously, gay fathers, which is the most egregious part. If you have two fathers, it just, like, didn't apply to their families because they excluded men. But, like, it just shows you the mentality that we're going to come out with this great parental leave policy. And, like, was Ivanka's all about female empowerment. Like, it was a big... They thought they were doing this amazing progressive thing, and men were not, they didn't think that fathers existed. Like, they didn't think that it's just wild to me. It's really wild, and we're so far behind when it comes to this stuff, and men in Iceland, I traveled to Iceland for the book, and, like, men in Iceland, like, kind of love parental leave. Like, they kind of love it. Feminism definitely is not making them run away from Iceland. I told them, like, I was like, I'll save you from feminism. And they were like, no. And I was like, I'll bring you to America where you're safe. And they were like, no. So, yeah, parental leave is a win-win for all people.
Yeah, another question? I thought we had one up front here. Thank you for your question.
Yeah.
Hello. A comment for Liz, and then a question for Joe.
Uh-oh.
Liz, I thought that you put that together very smart, just for like a lack of a better word, about like how the patriarchy doesn't actually work for anybody. I have a son, he's going on 6, and I am like constantly trying to protect him for the patriarchy, whereas I guess like you would have thought that I would be teaching him to lean into that power, just hone it all in, like, but that shit is dangerous. Like, he wants to paint his nails, like he wants to play with cars, he'll ride a pink scooter, and none of it changes who he is as a little boy, and that's really the takeaway. So thank you for that. And Joe, since I'm raising a young black boy, I don't know if you have one of your own. No, not yet. What would you tell younger you, maybe not 6-year-old you, but younger you, for a way to be who you are still without the toxic part?
All right, so I have a really crazy story for you if you're ready. In college, there's a few things. I had a dad who's very hard on me, but also very caring. I'm one of 7 kids. The doctor's office was attached to the house. I would say it was like the Cosby Show, but that won't work anymore these days. I read a book on vulnerability and kindness that totally changed the way that I look, not just at masculinity, but at my perception of self. When I was in college, I dealt with a lot of injuries I played football that kind of messed me up. I thought the only way to overcome them was to like have a chip on my shoulder, standard kind of maleness. I went to a meditation class the other day, and I sat and I meditated. And when I was meditating, I meditate heavily. But when I sat and I meditated, I saw my college self and high school self, and I literally started crying, and I forgave myself. I forgave myself and there's a book on shame in the book and about forgiveness, which I think is very important. And I forgave myself, and I look back on that. And it was very important in my time in my life and how I got into health and wellness in college, because I had to work through these issues. So what I would say is, when I was in a meditation class too, it was crazy. After I did that, the meditation teacher then said, all right, now I want you to envision a younger version of you and forgive yourself. And I was like, yo, this is crazy. But that's what happened. But what I would say is that you have to teach your son, especially as a black male, because the culture at large literally ages us. There's a very interesting study about how taking in negative attitudes as a black male shortens the telomeres of black males, and that's literally part of your aging. That means you age faster with the discriminatory attitudes. So from a very young age, you have to tell him is that it's okay to be vulnerable and forgive yourself, because to be honest, that's the ultimate form of masculinity. That's the only way that you can kind of grow. If you look at, kind of the historic greats, you have to have that constant process. So in the book, too, Liz talks about this man shield concept. Don't let him put that up. And especially you have to let him know that the culture of large, for all of us in here, especially as whatever you may be, but the culture at large doesn't want him to succeed. So allow him to fail, allow him to show that softer side, but at the end of the day, help him understand that that is just fertilizer for the ultimate growth and strength. And I think that'll be very powerful for him. Unfortunately, I think our time is up, but please follow Liz on Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, all that good stuff.
Follow Joe, he's amazing, and yeah, thank you.
Thank you,
Joe.
guys.
Thank you for your question, too, and yeah, thank you.
Good work, Liz.
Let's pretend like we were like full on combo.
And go buy the book.